Most people flinch when they hear the phrase fear of God. It sounds harsh, maybe even toxic. If God is love, then why would we be told to fear Him? That doesn't sound like a loving relationship. It sounds like abuse.
And so many Christians avoid the concept entirely, convinced that fear and faith can't exist in the same heart. But what if that reaction itself reveals just how deeply we've misunderstood what the fear of God really means? You see, we live in a culture that teaches us to only associate fear with harm, fear of punishment, fear of abandonment, fear of failure. But the Bible's definition of fear is completely different. When Scripture talks about fearing God, it's not talking about being scared of Him like a criminal hiding from a judge. It's talking about reverent awe, like standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and realizing just how small you are. It's fear that humbles, not fear that terrifies. It's the kind of fear that opens your eyes, not the kind that makes you shut them. And here's the irony. The more we try to erase this fear from our faith, the weaker and more casual our relationship with God becomes. Because without fear, we lose reverence. And without reverence, we lose the weight of what it means to stand before a holy God. That's why Proverbs 9:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Not love, not knowledge, not even faith. Wisdom begins with fear. Why? Because fear reorients everything. It reminds you, you're not God. You're not in charge. You're not the center. But this isn't just about philosophy. It's about posture. Think of Moses standing barefoot at the burning bush, or Isaiah trembling in the temple crying out, "Woe is me," or John, the disciple Jesus loved, collapsing like a dead man when he saw Christ glorified. These weren't pagans. These were God's friends. And yet when they encountered Him, the fear of the Lord didn't drive them away. It drove them to their knees. That kind of fear doesn't destroy intimacy. It deepens it. What's wild is that even Jesus, the Son of God, had a holy fear. Hebrews 5:7 says He was heard because of His godly fear. Let that sink in. Jesus feared God, not because He was afraid of punishment, but because He understood the full weight of His Father's holiness. This wasn't a crutch. It was a source of power. And if the perfect Son feared God, what makes us think we shouldn't? So maybe the fear of God isn't a problem to fix. Maybe it's the very thing we've been missing. Maybe our spiritual dryness isn't from a lack of passion, but from a lack of reverence. Because until you fear Him, you can't truly love Him. Not the way He deserves, and not the way your soul was created to. The fear of God isn't the kind that makes you run away. It's the kind that makes you bow down. That distinction is everything. The enemy wants us to associate fear with distance, because if he can convince you that fearing God means avoiding Him, you'll never seek Him deeply. But Scripture tells a different story. Psalm 25:14 says, "The secret of the Lord is with those who fear Him." Did you catch that? The fear of the Lord doesn't block intimacy. It invites it. It draws you closer to the heart of God than anything else. And that closeness changes everything. Because the more you fear God, the less you fear everything else. You stop fearing people's opinions. You stop fearing failure. You stop fearing death. Why? Because your soul has already bowed before the one who holds all things. When you fear God, every lesser fear loses its grip. That's why the early church could face persecution with joy. That's why martyrs could sing as they died. Their fear wasn't in this world, it was anchored in heaven. But fearing God also realigns your priorities. Suddenly, holiness starts to matter more than hype. Obedience becomes more important than opinions. You start asking different questions, not, "What do I want?" but, "What honors Him?" The fear of the Lord cleans your lens. It strips away the fog of self-will and self-focus and forces you to see life through His eyes. Not because you're scared of getting punished, but because you're overwhelmed by His purity, His justice, his beauty. You don't want to grieve him, not out of fear of wrath, but out of love for who he is. This is why so many Christians feel stuck. They want breakthrough, they want closeness, but they're approaching God casually, like he's just a buddy or a backup plan. But God doesn't reveal the depths of his presence to those who treat him lightly. He draws near to the contrite, to the trembling, to the ones who approach him like Isaiah. Here I am, Lord, undone, unworthy, and in awe. Reverence isn't a restriction. It's the door to deeper revelation. That's why the fear of God is called the beginning of wisdom, not the end. It's the starting place. It lays the foundation. It prepares your heart to receive what he wants to give. Without it, you might gain knowledge, but you'll miss wisdom. You might gain success, but you'll miss the weight of eternal significance. Because only when you fear God can he trust you to carry his voice, his authority, his presence. And if you're wondering why your spiritual walk feels shallow or numb, ask yourself this: have I truly feared him? Not with panic, but with wonder, with surrender, with trembling love. Because maybe what you're missing isn't more noise, more hype, or more emotion. Maybe what you're missing is the holy silence that comes when you finally realize who he really is. When the fear of God truly settles in your heart, you start to walk differently. Not out of pressure, but out of perspective. You become aware that every decision matters, that your words carry weight, that your actions echo beyond the moment. This fear doesn't make you paranoid, it makes you purposeful. You begin to live with eternity in view, not because you're trying to earn God's love, but because you're finally aware of his holiness. And that awareness changes you. Sin starts to lose its flavor. Not because temptation disappears, but because your appetite is different. When you truly fear the Lord, disobedience doesn't just feel wrong, it feels dishonoring. Not just I shouldn't, but I can't. I love him too much. That's how the fear of God sanctifies you from the inside out. It's not about behavior modification. It's about heart transformation. You stop asking, how far can I go? And start asking, how close can I stay? And this isn't just theory, it's everywhere in Scripture. Joseph didn't sleep with Potiphar's wife because of one thing. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Genesis 39:9. He feared God. That fear didn't lock him up, it set him free. Free to resist sin, free to walk in integrity, free to carry God's favor even in a prison. When you fear God, you don't need to fear missing out. You understand that obedience is not a limitation, it's protection. But today, we've made obedience optional. We talk a lot about God's grace, and rightly so, but rarely about his majesty. And so many people live casual Christian lives, bouncing from one compromise to another, numbing their conscience in the name of freedom. But freedom without fear becomes rebellion. Grace without reverence becomes entitlement. We cannot separate God's mercy from his majesty, and it's the fear of God that keeps that tension holy. The more you fear God, the less impressed you are with your own ideas. You start surrendering faster, trusting deeper, praying with more weight. Not because you're trying to sound spiritual, but because you know who you're talking to. The fear of God turns prayer from a shopping list into sacred ground. It transforms worship from a song into surrender. It makes faith less about feelings and more about fidelity. Faithfulness that costs something. And here's the beauty. The fear of God never pushes you into shame. It pulls you into alignment. It doesn't crush you under guilt. It lifts you into grace. It doesn't say, you're not enough. It says, he is worthy. It's not meant to be a prison, it's a pathway. And when you walk it, your life becomes a living altar. One that burns, not with fear of punishment, but with holy fire. The fear of God doesn't make you feel far from Him. It reminds you how close He truly is. That every breath you take is sustained by mercy. That every heartbeat echoes His grace. That even in silence, He is near. That realization doesn't cause distance. It causes stillness. It causes reverence. And in a noisy world, reverence is rare. But it is also the doorway to everything our souls are starving for: peace, clarity, presence, holiness. So many chase emotional highs to feel close to God. But feelings fade. The fear of God, though, it roots you. It steadies your heart when the storm rages. It anchors your worship when the music stops. Because when you fear Him, your faith is no longer built on circumstances. It's built on who He is. And that kind of faith doesn't shake. That kind of faith can't be manipulated. It doesn't need to be seen. It just burns. Wisdom begins here, not with experience, not with information, but with fear. Proverbs didn't say, "The love of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." It said fear. Why? Because love without reverence can become sentimental. But fear, holy fear, turns love into obedience. It turns knowledge into action. It takes your faith from shallow to sacred. And in a world obsessed with depth, it's this fear that deepens everything. When you truly fear God, you stop playing games with your calling. You stop flirting with sin. You stop trying to impress people and start longing to please Him. Your convictions get heavier, but so does your joy. Your heart gets softer, but your spirit gets stronger. Because the fear of the Lord doesn't weaken you, it wakes you up. It reminds you, this is real. God is holy. Life is short, and every step matters. But maybe the greatest gift of fearing God is this: it makes you fall in love with Him in a way you never could before. Because once your eyes are open to His majesty, His power, His righteousness, then and only then can you truly understand the weight of His mercy. Then grace stops being cheap. It becomes sacred. Then the cross stops being a symbol and becomes a holy scandal. That this God, this holy, righteous, fearsome God, chose you. That will change you forever. So if the fear of God has felt distant, confusing, or uncomfortable, maybe now you see it differently. Maybe now you realize it's not the enemy of intimacy. It's the foundation of it. Because to fear Him is not to run from Him. It's to stand in awe, to bow in surrender, and to live in a way that says, "You are holy, and I am yours."